Who forced the British Empire to give up slavery?
There was a battle in between the people.
Who forced the British Empire to give up slavery?
Well, to start off, there was no one to force them.
Thank you.
And
who forced the Barbarers of North Africa to give up slavery?
Well, it was agreements between the...
No, it wasn't. It was done by the Americans, and they did it by blowing the out of Tripoli. And I absolutely have no respect for any Muslim argument that tries to play that down or tries to justify it. It is identical to if some Belgium apologist turned to you as a Congolese and said that what the Belgian king did in Congo was justified. The reality is, Muhammad bought and sold slaves. Muhammad traded 2 black slaves for an Arab one. He gave a slave as a gift to his own daughter, a human being as a gift. Now notice they're rattled now. We have forgotten what has happened in European history. What has happened, all you remember is what the liberals tell you, and the liberals teach you a filtered history that encourages you to be embarrassed and ashamed of who you are. Because it's based upon the idea of privacy and of maintaining a person's privacy, and you can't get from privacy to abortion. But the point is, the point is, in the American system, you see, even the American human-made system is better than Islam, because in the American system, you have judges that are identified by the state to be judges. But I challenge you. Right? So I'm saying that I would rather live under the American man-made system than under Sharia law, because in the American system they identify who is to be a judge, but under Sharia law, what is your criterion for deciding who is a scholar to follow? Show me Quranically.
Hold on, you're conflating two things. With one breath you talk about judges, and then you talk about scholars. A judge is not necessarily an Islamic scholar.
A judge in the American system is a scholar of the law.
No, I understand that.
Right.
But
so
an alim
is
not a qadi.
Granted.
There's two different.
Granted. So, but okay. So tell me within the Islamic system how you identify who is the alim to follow.
Oh, it's a lot to do with where you're from. It's a lot to do with like access to scholarship.
Now show me the criterion in the Quran or in the Hadiths, because I am saying that a fundamental flaw of Islam is that you have a circular reasoning about who you identify as your scholars, and those scholars have a disproportionate influence over what the community believes.
I just told you that it's to do with where you're from, and it's to do with the access that you have to knowledge. So for example, because there is an assumption in the Quran that the scholars are agreed upon by the people. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is that, and you know this quite well, that there is a tradition that we trace back all the way to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for example, the reason why the majority of people, geographically speaking, are Hanifis in Southeast Asia and Central Asia is to do with the fact that the companion who migrated to that region has influenced greatly that region, and his ideas have influenced it. And then obviously it's morphed, and then you have the Hanafi strand. You go to the east coast of Africa, you have the Malikis. Why? Again, because of historical events that took place and the early Muslims who came there. So it's very similar to like Christianity. With
no, it's not. It's really not, because within the Christian faith we have this idea of apostolic succession. So there is a clear succession of
I just
bishop.
explained that to you.
No. You haven't explained any criterion.
I told you.
No, I didn't interrupt you. Don't interrupt me.
You cut me off. You did cut me off. I wasn't even finished.
Sorry, I thought you had finished. If there's something you want to add, but I'll let you finish and then I'll reply.
Sure.
So what else do you want to add on to what you were saying?
So based upon that, there is a clear lineage that, and that's different. It's like a tree, and there's different branches of that lineage. Yeah. But if you trace them back, they all go back to the Prophet Muhammad, and Muslims tend to be in between that umbrella.
Okay. Can I reply?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I still haven't seen any criterion. What I've heard is an opinion, what I've heard is a conjecture, and what I've heard is a description of a historical process. And I have no dispute about, I mean, I do have disputes about the historical process, but for the moment, to progress the argument, I'm just going to allow it.
Yeah.
But my point to you is that in the Christian faith, there's a very clear explanation of how leadership is passed forward. The apostles gathered in the book of Acts to choose the replacement for Judas, and they laid hands upon his replacement. And then that has continued down through the centuries. We can identify bishops and the seats of the bishops and who sat in those seats of the bishops. If you go to Cairo in Egypt, you can trace it all the way back from the current Pope, Taudros III, right back to, or Taudros II, right back to Mark, and you can see who was sat in that seat all the way through. And it's biblical, it's based on apostolic tradition. What I'm asking you is to show me the criterion by which you can justify having a Sunni scholar over, say, a Shia scholar. What is the criterion by which you can decide to follow a Sunni scholar and not a Shia scholar?
To you, I will answer, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. Do you follow Eastern Orthodox Christians?
I'm just a Christian.
Okay, but there are Eastern Orthodox Christians.
Yeah, they're Christians as well.
Yeah, but do you follow any of their scholars?
I'm just a Christian.
Okay, I understand that you're
Yeah.
just a Christian. The same way I'm just a Muslim, but like there are, if you're not following them, there's plenty of people who follow them, right?
Yeah.
Now, very similar. Everything you said, just replace Islam with it. It's very similar. We had Sahabas, apostles.
So you have the laying on of hands?
We had Sahabas and apostles who were determining the leadership very early on after the Prophet passes away.
It was disputed though.
And that's where the schism happens.
Yeah.
And there's some form of schism as well with the Christian church.
Can I reply to that point?
Sure.
Because the reality is that the reason why Islam schismed right at the very beginning is because Muhammad never gave any clear understanding of how leadership should be passed on. And so Sunni and Shia right at the very start have a disagreement about who should have been the rightful leader after Muhammad. By contrast, Christians don't have anything like their first schism until into the 4th or 5th century. And they don't have anything like another schism until the 11th century. And then they don't have another schism after that until the 16th century. And then within the Protestant Reformation, they're schisming every other week. You know, but the point is that because of our nature of how authority is passed forward, because Jesus made it clear how authority is passed forward through apostolic succession, the natural tendency of man to build his own personal empire didn't rupture the church until centuries after Christ, a millennia after Christ, and over a millennia after Christ. But in Islam, precisely because Muhammad failed as a leader to make it clear how he was to be succeeded, the rupture amongst Muslims was immediate. It was in the first generation, immediately amongst the people that had actually known Muhammad personally. And that is another example that Islam is not a religion from God. It isn't perfect, as Allah said it is. And Muhammad isn't a rightly guided prophet, as he claimed to be, because the division that has cost so many Muslim lives results from Muhammad's failure as a leader.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, there's lots of assumptions that you're making and a bit of a like historical, some historical mistakes that you're clearly mentioning here, in particular to Christianity. So your claim was that Christianity has no schisms until the 3rd century, and the next time in the 12th century, 16 and 15 and 16. Well, there are schisms as well in Christianity during the 9th century and before. Besides that, Christianity for the first 100 to 300 years is a religion that is under persecution. There's no official state that backs it. There's no official state that promotes it. So Christianity for a very long time survives persecution and prevails eventually.
Thanks be to God.
You know? And this is quite different to Islam, where there's a state that exists in Medina that has power over the Arabian Peninsula and exerts power that way, and conflicts happens that way. And it's very similar to Christianity. When a state then takes it on, that we find that there seems to be a pattern that, friction happens due to power struggles more than anything. But I wouldn't say that that the succession, despite of its hurdles that it's gone through, that it was a failure. I mean, just within the first 3 or 4 Khalifas, if you like, the people who were in charge, despite of the problems that we're going through. First of all, how do we actually measure failure and success? Because
it certainly isn't through military victory. I know that's a classic narrative of Muslims, that Islam is true because look, we conquered the world, but that's utter rubbish.
Yeah.
The Nazis conquered huge portions of the world. Napoleon conquered huge portions of the world.
Yeah.
Genghis Khan makes the Islamic Caliphate look like an amateur beginners rally of world tyrants. You know, because you can conquer land doesn't prove that your religion is true, because if that was true, then we should all follow the religion of Genghis Khan, who had singularly the largest land empire in history, and has still to date has the largest land empire in history. So that's no proof of anything.
I wouldn't personally use that either.
Okay, good. It's bad Muslim logic, propagated by lots of unthinking Muslims who want to boast from a place of pride and ego, and ignores the fact that the entire Islamic world was ultimately conquered by Christian Enlightenment Europe eventually.
Colonialism.
You know, and we dissected many a caliphate and destroyed many a caliphate, and still do today. The most recent attempt being ISIS, of course.
I wouldn't use Christianity in that.
Well, no. In the medieval period, the Portuguese caused the collapse of the caliphate that was based around Egypt through a blockade. I agree, it's not. I'm just responding to the ejaculations of overexcitable Muslim da'i that present this as some great achievement when clearly it isn't.
My measure of achievement stems in culture, you know.
Right. So,
culture,
shall I tell you what I think the measure of success is?
I mean,
from a Christian's point of view.
If I'm saying measure of success in terms, because you talked about leadership, right?
I'm talking about the failure of Muhammad to say how he should be succeeded as leader.
Right. And leadership it's intrinsically intertwined with the idea of prosperity of a state, if you like, you know, and how the state prospers. And I feel like conquest is like the bottom of the list, honestly.
But it's on the list for you.
Yeah, partially, but it's not something that I would use to boast. You know, it's just something that happened. It would be culture. It would be the way cultures found their own way on how to interpret that very thing that they take on eventually. Not always at the beginning. There is some form of resistance with the early conquered lands, but eventually very beautiful cultures, you know, spring off. And then we have like the poetry of Rumi and Shams and everything that is a amalgamation of like Persian culture and Islamic culture, and then it births something new. So
you recognize that as a Christian, I just point to the Byzantine Empire and go, hey, we got all that.
I would agree.
We got all that. But more than that, the achievement of the church was to go not only from a persecuted minority that managed to, through peace, good works, and through argument to convert its persecutors. But even when that socioeconomic and political system collapsed in the West, the church managed to re-establish a state, the Holy Roman Empire, from nothing. You know, so if we're talking, and then through things like the Carolingian Renaissance, recover so much of what was at risk of being lost. And so if we're talking about cultural achievements, I personally think that that's, you know, if that's your criterion, I think it's a very poor one.
Why?
It's a very poor one because all I do is point to the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, and I've got enough ammunition there to counter any achievement within the Islamic world.
I'm not measuring the two empires. Yeah. I'm just stating.
But I was going to come to finish.
It's also arguably on who had more influence.
So,
I mean, it's an argument that we can make here.
Yeah. So to land on my point,
sure,
is that despite the fact that when we Christians converted the Roman Empire, we converted the whole of the Roman Empire. When we
quite brutally as well.
At times and in places, but you would be wrong and you would be mischaracterizing to say that it was all about brutality and force. There were definitely times that happened. Yeah. Like when, for instance, Charlemagne fought against the Saxons, my ancestors. Yeah. He fought against them, and thanks be to God, he stopped them because they were raiding his lands and taking slaves, just like Muslims were. And when but the point is, the point is, the Islamic State for 1400 years has been a bastion of injustice and cruelty. For 1400 years, Christians were second-class citizens. For 1400 years, Jews were second-class citizens. For 1400 years, Islam, without a single break, practiced the idea of slavery and never once stopped it anywhere in the whole of the Islamic world. So for 1400 years, yes, you can point to the poems of Rushdie and other people that you mentioned. Rumi, sorry. But let's not forget the fact that Islam has been a bastion of evil and injustice for 14 centuries as well. Whereas Christianity, by comparison, yes, we have evils that you can point to, like our practice of slavery. But as a Christian, I can point to regions, countries and continents where we stopped the slave trade, for instance, where we restrained the hand of violence, for instance. Sorry. It's all right. Where we restrained the hand of violence, for instance. You know, the Byzantines preferred the idea of basically paying their enemies not to wage war rather than fighting. Fighting for the Byzantium after the conversion to Christianity was a last resort, not a first resort. Are you aware of that?
No, it's new to me.
Yeah, because
very interesting.
there were economic reasons for it as well. I mean, I don't want to say it was all spiritual, but in the Christian faith, if you committed the sin of violence, even as a soldier, you had to do penance. Even as a soldier, because we always understood that killing someone was killing someone imbued with the image of God, even if that someone was a pagan or a jihadi Muslim. So a soldier would do penance for fighting in wars and killing.
I mean, look, and you seem to be someone who's very, like, you know, aware of history, you know, and you know your history, right? And the same way you said to me, it would be like a mischaracterization to pinpoint like mishaps that happen in Christianity. And you know what? I'll be even honest. I'll even go as far to say that on the surface it may look like Christianity, but usually it was like some other political motivations behind these atrocities. And like I would argue the same way that you're right, that there are certain things in Islamic history that are very horrendous and very obnoxious and not humane that happen and are tragedies. But then also there's a lot of like good that came out of it, you know, and I can pinpoint as well.
And I wouldn't dispute that.
Right? So I feel like in this conversation in particular, we're kind of in the same boat. So if there was like an atheist who wants to come.
But that's the point that I made right at the beginning, is pointing to the good and the bad of our civilizations gets us nowhere. What we need to look at is, what does the religion teach? Right? And the practice of slavery, for instance, is constituted clearly within the text of Islam as something that you can do and should do, especially to those captured in war. That's undeniable. So that's why for 1400 years there was never an emancipation movement. The only time there was an emancipation movement in the Islamic world is when Christian gunboats went to North African cities and bombed them into submission. That was the only time that the Muslims gave up slavery. We Christians gave up slavery by choice, We Christians had to force you to give up slavery.
It was not choice, by the way.
Sorry, who forced the British Empire to give up slavery?
There was a battle in between the people, isn't
No,
it?
who forced the British Empire to give up slavery?
Well, to start off, there was no one to force them.
Thank you.
And
Who
exactly-
forced the Barbarers of North Africa to give up slavery?
Well, it was agreements between the...
No, it wasn't.
the
It was
Americans.
done by the Americans, and they did it by blowing the out of Tripoli,
there was-
as did the French and the British.
There were treaties between, actually,
Done at gunpoint.
There
These
was-
were not negotiations. They were done at gunpoint.
You're
You're
not-
misrepresenting the history.
I'm not.
You are. People can check it for themselves.
yeah, they can.
Go and look at the
I'm-
Barbary
I'm
pirates.
so
And,
confident. I'm
go and
not-
look at the American wars against the Barbary
Yeah,
pirates.
yeah.
You were forced to give up
Okay.
slavery. You didn't do it by choice.
Sure. So, and then also, whilst you're looking at those battles, you come very quickly to conclusion that the Moroccan kingdom, in fact, was the first country, not the European countries who were fighting against America, but a Muslim country that acknowledged the autonomy of the North American state. There was treaties that led to the evolution of like taken slaves, American slaves. They were like hostages, for example, in Tripoli and in places like Fez, and the Americans were able to negotiate the freedom of these slaves via having alliances with the Moroccans. What I wanted to say to you is this. It is true that we can't necessarily look at the good and the bad that happens.
Yeah, but
in history.
are you slavery because it's constituted in the
Yeah.
Islamic text?
So yeah, thank you. So I wanted to come to something. I believe you have made assumptions. So you said constitution, constituted. What can you explain to me what you mean by constituted?
By what I meant by constituted is it is embodied.
Embodied.
As in, I can look at a verse in the Quran that legitimizes the buying and the selling of slaves, the use of slaves, the treatment of slaves. And therefore it is constituted, it is embodied in the text that you can have slaves. And that is the reason why for 1400 years Muslims practiced slavery. And the principal victim of the Islamic slave trade were Christians from Armenia, Christians from Eastern Europe, Christians from Western Europe, Christians from Georgia, Christians from around the Middle East, and and Hindus and Buddhists. They were the principal victims of the Islamic slave trade. 1 million European Christians were taken as slaves in the Islamic slave
It's quite
trade.
irrelevant for you to mention Christians because
I mentioned Buddhists and Hindus.
sure, or any other religions, because with the same breath, have you not ever wondered, and this is documented, have you not ever wondered how this seemingly perfect system was able to, procure so many slaves out of Europe?
You didn't procure them, you
No.
stole them from
Well-
our families.
May I finish? I'm allowing you.
Sorry.
There is some strange reason such a perfect system that exists between the taking of slaves by the Ottomans in particular. Why was that? Now I came across this what's it called? It was an autobiographical book by a former slave who lived amongst the Muslims for a very long time under the Ottomans. And it's like a historical account that he tells about. And that historical account was actually a trend that was taking place in the northern parts of Europe, the Scandinavian countries like Iceland and Denmark and all these places. He tells a story on how he was captured by Christians. He was captured by Christians and was then sold to the Ottomans. So that's why I was saying that in a way it's kind of irrelevant to mention that because the order of the day was slavery. And some people were more involved in it. There was a demand and what's the other word? Demand and
Supply
problem that existed in Europe, and there have been unfortunately many Christians were abjugated by Christians and then sold to the
Can I
Ottomans.
reply to this?
Sure.
Because this kind of Islamic mythos that's being created to rewrite history. And it is based purely on apologetic. And it's based purely on apologetic because Muslims feel the sting of the criticism that Islam teaches slavery and therefore Muslims practice slavery for 1400 years and never had an emancipation movement, except when Christian gunboats forced you to stop. The reality is we don't need you to tell us our history. You're from the Congo. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. You know what the Belgians did to the Congolese.
Yeah.
There's no point. You would never accept some Belgium apologist trying to justify the genocide that was committed against the Congolese people because you know your history as a Congolese.
Yeah.
Well, believe me when I tell you, I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I know the history of how we were brutalized by Islamic armies that came into our towns crying out Allahu Akbar, killed our men, raped our women, desecrated our churches and kidnapped our children. And I absolutely have no respect for any Muslim argument that tries to play that down or tries to justify it. It is identical to if some Belgium apologist turned to you as a Congolese and said that what the Belgian king did in Congo was justified. It was a brutal, savage act, and it went on for centuries, and you did not stop it by choice. You were forced to stop it. You were beaten by us. We crushed your armies. We destroyed your empires. And then we forced you to abolish the slave trade. You did not do it by choice. By contrast, we Christians also practiced a horrific slave trade for 300 years, maybe 400 years at a push.
Much longer than that.
Let me finish. Christians abolished slavery by their own choice. The British Empire chose to abolish slavery. There was no power on earth big enough to force them to do it. They did it on their own. The United States fought a war to abolish their own slavery. No one forced the United States to fight that war. They chose to do it. The French abolished slavery. No one forced them to do it. The Spanish abolished slavery. No one forced them to do it. No one forced the Italians. No one forced the Holy Roman Empire. No one forced Poland. No one forced Russia. They all did it because they recognized, and they had continuously recognized, that it was improper to keep slaves. And they did so because of Christian teaching, because of the dignity of human beings, because of the dignity that the Christian faith teaches. So my point to you is, because we're talking about, remember we got onto this because you were trying to talk about the glories of the Islamic civilization, and I said, well, I can point to the glories of the Byzantine and Holy Roman Empire, the Christian civilizations. But then I said, let's remember that this is not about what good Muslims or bad Muslims did, what good Christians or bad Christians did. It's about what the texts teach and allow. And because the texts teach and allow the practice of slavery, Islam and the Islamic caliphates have for 1400 years been the bastion of an incredible injustice of man inflicting onto man.
That's not true, but anyway.
People can check for themselves.
Let me answer to what you're saying. So first, when I mentioned to you that, so are you disputing that there weren't movements of Christians who were taking other Christians as slaves? Are you disputing?
No, I'm not disputing that.
Okay.
What I'm pointing out is what you're not pointing out, is that Christians have always fought against slavery for 2,000 years and have always sought to end slavery for 2,000 years, but you cannot point to me an emancipation movement that's 1,400 years old, because there never was one in Islam.
But you're saying that Christian has fought 2,000 years. That's not true.
I'll show you.
We have periods of, anyway, I don't want to go into it. So that's the other thing.
No, you've made a claim. We now need to look at whether it's true or not.
But you mentioned a lot of things, so obviously I have to respond to all of them, isn't it? What was the other thing you were talking about? I forgot.
So, coming back to...
Was there an emancipation movement in Islam? That's basically...
No, there wasn't.
No, but this is what I'm trying to say. Before we even talk about emancipation, all these things, they're not. These things didn't happen like he was arguing because of Christianity.
They did.
Solely. No.
They did. What inspired William? What inspired William Wilberforce?
Let me finish. Okay. these are not the reasons why these things happen solely. Yes, you're right in the sense that there was a Christian group of people who realized that they had gone wrong, that the church had gone wrong about slavery, and they were doing the utmost to change that. So the British Empire did not just decide to change their opinions. There was a struggle that led to that decision to be made. Secondly, the reasons why the emancipation period happens is because of the socio-economical reasons that were taking place. Slavery was not as profitable any longer and as sustainable any longer to be maintained, because the Industrial Revolution came in and basically slavery in a way became obsolete. That's why we have documentations of the English Empire paying reparation to former slave owners.
Something that no Islamic empire has ever done.
Yes, I can give you examples. Because the former slave owners were losing, ironically, on profit by having slaves. So the government said, look, let these slaves go, we will reimburse you. And the motivation there was not Christianity. Yes, there might be some influence of it, but the motivation was purely economical. You mentioned French. You said the French abolished slavery because they were... Yeah, right?
No one forced them.
Well,
who forced
France had colonized Haiti. Okay, let me finish. You're gonna have to listen to this.
It's not addressing the point.
Yeah, I am addressing the point. French had colonized Haiti for a very, very long time. And for anyone who has a bit of understanding of history knows that France did not emancipate Haiti. France lost against Haiti because the former slaves in Haiti fought against the French people.
Good for them.
Haiti had to. So because of that, some French colonies in North Carolina had to be sold because they had lost Haiti. So this idea that this European Christian movement that emerged out of the goodness of Jesus Christ to emancipate slaves, it was not just that simple. It was not just that simple.
No.
Now let me answer about the emancipation in Islam that you're talking about, right? So you're saying that for some strange reason there does not appear a movement, a so-called movement called emancipation period. One thing that we need to understand is, first of all, that the Islamic slave trade was never centralized. There was not a place where slavery and the laws of slavery were passed upon or were conducted by. Slavery was done by independent merchants predominantly. Well, you can bring the evidence to disprove me. It was done predominantly by Islamic merchants or noblemen. It was not a state-funded, state-focused enterprise, like, for example, we see with the bull that was passed in the 15th century by Pope Nicholas V, who passed legally a bull allowing King Alfonso V of Portugal to go to Africa, state-sanctioned, religiously sanctioned, to go to Africa and enslave the people.
Can I reply?
You will not find something similar like that in Islamic history.
Can I reply?
You will find that there are merchants and noblemen who engage in the slavery.
Can I reply?
No, this is the last thing I'm saying.
Wait.
That's the last thing I'm saying.
No, bro, you've been talking a while. Let me to reply.
Well. Let me finish.
Let me talk. Let me just reply to this because
I'm going to walk away.
Right.
Let me finish.
Land on your point.
Yeah.
Don't go on for another 10 minutes.
I won't.
Right, go on.
I promise.
Now, I need to reply to this. You just lied to everybody. You just lied to everybody.
We're going to bring the Googles and everything.
Yeah, you just lied to everybody.
Okay, now, talking about emancipation, the same way there is a realization and acknowledgement for slavery, I would call it acknowledgement for slavery in the Islamic text, there's also a great motivation on an individual level to free slaves. This is answering your question. Islam has a philosophy inbuilt in the religion that freeing slaves is the highest thing that
Can I reply now?
So that's a great motivation.
Can I reply then?
There's a great motivation for people to free slaves.
Can I reply now?
That can bring
So firstly, I'm just going to blow out of this water the idea that slavery was never centralized. get your phones out and Google the word Janissary. Slavery was so centralized within the Islamic system that they built entire armies out of slaves. Go and look at the Mamluks.
The Ottomans.
Exactly, the Ottomans and the Janissaries. He literally just lied to all of you, and the reason why he did it is because he knows the reason why he did it is not because he doesn't know about the Janissaries, because we've had this conversation with him before. I've used the example of the Janissaries before. He knows about the Janissaries, but he is saying that to you because he's hoping none of you will go and check. But the reality is if you Google the word Janissaries, you will learn about the plight of Christian children that were kidnapped from their families, brutalized, and turned into a personal slave army of the Caliph. He lied to you when he said it wasn't centralized. Why do we know? Because there were slave markets in virtually every major Islamic town and city, publicly selling slaves. Do you honestly think that that could be allowed if the government wanted to suppress it? Of course not. But the reason why you could find slave markets in every Islamic town and city throughout every Islamic caliphate for the last 1,400 years, and the only group in our entire world that still today is practicing slavery, where I can go and buy a black child for less than a McDonald's, is in the Islamic world, in Khartoum, in North Sudan, in Malawi, and other places in North Africa. The only group, ladies and gentlemen, that have tried recently to re-establish slavery are Muslims. ISIS tried to re-establish slavery in the Middle East. They were doing a practice that Muslims have done for 1400 years. Do not believe the lies you have just heard, the obfuscating of the fact that the Quran permits slavery. Now, he pointed out that we Christians have our own bad history with slavery, and I concede that point. Not even going to dispute it. He's absolutely right. But we Christians also have a long history of fighting against slavery. I'll give you examples from antiquity, from the Roman period. So between the years 100 to 400 AD, Christians were fighting against slavery. Saint Melania herself freed 8,000 slaves. Saint Ovidius of Gaul freed 500 slaves. Saint Chromatius, a Roman prefect under Diocletian, who persecuted the church. No. I'm finishing. I will talk. Let me talk. I let you speak. Let me speak. Under Diocletian, 1,400 slaves. Hermes, a prefect under Emperor Trajan, set free 1,200 slaves. Remember, we Christians were doing this as a minority, as a persecuted people, not as the people in power. We were doing these releasing of slaves as persecuted Christians. Saint Augustine encouraged the clergy under him to free slaves. Saint Constantine said that if you killed a slave, if you kidnapped someone to make them a slave, you would receive the death penalty. So right from the very beginning of Christianity, and he doesn't want to listen to these points because it contradicts the narrative. He contradicts the narrative that he wants to push on genuine people who want to assume goodwill. But the reality is, Muhammad bought and sold slaves. Muhammad traded 2 black slaves for an Arab one. He gave a slave as a gift to his own daughter, a human being as a gift. Now notice they're rattled now. They wanted me to be quiet, but notice how they're interrupting. Because they're rattled, because they know that this exposes what they're saying. And I will bring the hadith the next time I speak. But did Jesus own slaves? Is Jesus our example? Now, I've got to raise my voice because we've got a triggered Muslim over here.
No. I'm still curious about your argument about the
Wait, one second. I'm still sorry. One second. I've got one more point to make. I've got one more point to make, and it's a question. It's a question. If a Muslim today, under a Sharia system organized by a caliph, was to own a slave and to treat that slave well, in the best possible way, by owning the slave, as a Muslim, would he be doing anything wrong?
What do you mean?
I think that question was pretty obvious. Was it obvious to everyone else?
Yeah, let me answer to it
Okay.
after.
It is an interesting question.
Yeah, I will answer it afterwards. But you were saying about, so first of all, I do not appreciate that the first thing that you had to do was say I'm a liar and attack me personally. You know, we haven't had discussion. We have a discussion here. If I missed out something, it's for me to go back and answer that.
Did you know about the Janissaries?
I knew about the Janissaries.
Thank you.
Okay, mismatching arguments. Let's
So you did know about the Janissaries?
I didn't, but I don't view them in the way you view them. So the Janissaries, for example, if we talk about slavery and slaves, the definition of a slave is someone who's subjugated and someone who's taken
Like the Janissaries?
solely for the what's it called? Solely for the profit or the benefit of the master.
So the Janissaries, that's exactly what happened to the Janissaries.
Why are you answering? I don't want you to answer. Let me talk.
Well, I'm just pointing
No,
out.
you don't
We
have
are taught
to.
that's a
You don't
perfect
have to.
example of the
I was
Janissaries.
for at least 5 minutes. Okay, so that's the definition of a slave. A slave is someone who is solely in service or solely there in profit and advantage for the master. So the Janissaries that he mentioned.
But especially the slave is not free, right?
Yes, and the slave is not free.
That's
Yeah.
maybe the...
Like
Yes.
the Janissaries.
Well, the Janissaries, it was that the Janissaries came from a region in the Balkans who were, through military, what's it called, activities conquered. They were conquered.
And stolen.
Please, can you stop, my bro? I'll come to it.
And stolen. Because you're lying to people.
I'm not lying.
You're
Stop.
literally obfuscating the truth
you know,
that they were
how can I talk
kidnapped
if you
children.
saying I'm a liar?
You were kidnapped children.
Okay.
He's omitting the fact that they were kidnapped children.
No,
He's omitting that fact.
No, there was a...
Do you admit it?
No, there was a system in place. There was a system in place where the families and the Ottomans were in cohort of what was happening. That was because the Balkans were conquered at one point, and there was a levy you had to give, like a tax levy. And one of the systems was to inscribe your child into the army. Now, these were
That's not what happened.
Well,
It's not what happened.
Everyone can read. If I lie, I'm
Go
lying,
and speak
right?
to go and speak to Bulgarian Christians or Hungarian Christians.
So these
That's not what happened.
Janissaries weren't slaves who were working on the plantation field to levy profit. Those Janissaries were elite soldiers who had given a salary and had also some form of autonomy in the
But it was
Ottoman.
not a free
But they were
choice.
taken.
It was not exactly.
It was
They were
not a
taken
free
by their
choice.
parents.
Was it a free choice?
It was not a free choice.
No, it was a levy.
Yes, but not
There was a.
So it
it's
was a
like-
tax.
No,
They
hold on,
taxed. They
hold on.
literally took your child as a tax.
Bob,
Exactly.
No, that's
exactly.
Not true. That's not true.
No, that is true.
No,
That is true. Go and speak to the Greeks. Go and
Why
speak
you-
to the Romanians. Go and speak to the Hungarians.
Career path for the children.
No, that's
is
not true.
That is
That's not true.
So that's what I'm saying. It's not allowing me to talk. Please allow me to talk. So these Janissaries, there was an agreement between.
You don't know the
and
history,
state.
mate. You don't know the history.
I do.
You really don't.
Most of them were taken, but for some families it was a good career path for their children. That's true.
No.
No, they were forced.
No, it's like
You're absolutely right. They were forced. They didn't have a choice
but it's
not
like-
to agree.
it's like-
They didn't have a
it's
choice not to agree.
You know when there's
You know, history is never simple.
yeah, you know when there's
It's never black
Not
and white.
all.
Yeah.
It was simple. So what he says was some parents probably thought it was a good choice.
because there was a form of social mobility
And-
that
but
existed.
it was not a free choice.
Yeah.
Those children, those parents loved
There's a
their
balance.
faith
Thank
and
you
they
very
did
much.
not want to give their children up.
I think
They
you want
hid
to
their
talk to you
children.
guys about, unfortunately, I was trying to convey. but
They
very
hid their
difficult.
children.
However. Yeah.
First of all, are you Islamic yourself?
Yeah, I'm a Muslim. Yeah.
So that must bring up some feelings.
No.
He celebrates it.
It's to do with my understanding of it, right? So, the reason, so
Thank you.
Islam isn't per se against slavery, because what Islam was doing was, when it came, there was slavery already in existence. There was an existent slave system. So what Islam was doing was that, and some scholars argue that it was trying to wean off people of slavery by having these individual things like the manumission of slaves. That's the highest thing that an individual can do. That if you have a slave, that the highest thing that you can do is to free a slave. So that's why it doesn't.
That's really weird, right?
Yeah. So it doesn't fit in the context of like, there is a clear injunction in Islam that says slavery is forbidden. The same way it does with the Western European understanding of slavery. And also it has also to do with how slaves are viewed. Slave, for example, the term slavery has a very Eurocentric, connotation to it. You know, slaves being the Slavic people of Eastern European descent. And through the English language, we adopted it but there are certain forms. But there are certain forms of servitude that we wouldn't say is a transatlantic slave trade. For example, the Russian serfs, right? The Russian serfs weren't, in the classical sense, slaves, right? They had their own land to work on, but they had to levy taxes again. Same thing with feudalism. So I think when we talk about these things, they're very nuanced, and we have to be very careful what terms that we use.
Can I jump in? Can I jump into this conversation?
I haven't finished.
Can I ask? Can I jump into this conversation, or do you not want to hear what I've got to say?
I will talk about it after.
Like, I would like to invite him and talk to me, because unfortunately, what he's doing right now, he's missing out huge amounts of information in his apologetic. He's missing out huge amounts of information that he's filling you in on. He really is. He really is. So the reality is, he's talking about, you know, how Islam says free slaves. What he forgets to tell you is the system has managed to maintain the large. It was based upon you took slaves through conquest, and so the amount of slaves coming in was always huge compared to the amount of slaves leaving. The reality is, there's real choices that we have to face. Like in the West, we're taught to be objective, we're taught to be neutral. That's our natural disposition. But the reality is that in what kind of civilization we build, based very much about what its fundamental premises are. If your fundamental premises are Islam, you have no basis to get rid of slavery, and that's why the Muslim world has never got rid of slavery. And you heard him admit that Islam has nothing against slavery. In other words, slavery is perpetual.
Your pre-assumption that Christianity is based on equality, I do not quite get.
I didn't make that argument.
No, but if you turn it around.
So let me deal with that. So the Christian faith, as I tried to demonstrate, we abandoned our slavery by choice, not by force. No one forced Britain. Britain was the superpower of its time. It gave up slavery by choice. No one was big enough to force us to do it. But the point, and we've been doing that all the way through history. You go and look, the first time slavery was abolished in England was in 1068, when William the Conqueror conquered England. He said to the Saxons, slavery is not compatible with Christianity, and he abolished slavery.
Based on the assumption of equality of people.
Based on
amongst Christians, but they could enslave non-Christians.
So let's come to that. Let's come to that. Because it's true that the abolition of slavery certainly started from amongst Christians, but logically Christians built on that principle to include non-Christians as well, which is why we abolish slavery even for non-Christians as well. And I want to show you the biblical basis. Now remember, he said that the Quran does not teach against slavery. But the book of Philemon, which is one of the principal texts of European civilization, because it's in the Bible, and the Bible is a principal text of European civilization, says this, right? Philemon was a slave owner, and Paul was writing to Philemon, the slave owner, about a slave called Onesimus. Read, this is what he says, and I'll just highlight the key points. Therefore, this is Paul speaking, though I, Paul, have enough confidence in Christ to order you to do what is proper, yet for love's sake, rather, I appeal to you. So he's saying, I have the authority to command you to do something that is right. Now listen to what he says is the right thing to do. I appeal to you for my child, Onesimus, the slave, whom I have begotten in my imprisonment, who formerly was useless to you, but now is useful both to you and to me. So he's saying, I could command you to do the right thing about Onesimus, but I'm not. I'm appealing to you. I'm appealing about Onesimus because he's useful. But without your consent, I did not want to do anything, so that your goodness would not be in effect by compulsion, but of your own free will. So he's appealing to some sense of right that Philemon already has. And he says this, for perhaps he was for this reason separated from you for a while, that you would have him back forever, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother. So Paul is literally saying to Philemon, Onesimus, I'm sending back to you, but don't receive him as a slave, receive him as a brother. And that is a book that was written 2,000 years ago. The Quran was written 1,400 years ago, and it establishes slavery. This really makes a difference about the kind of society that you have. If we build our laws on Philemon, we end up getting rid of slavery. If we build our laws on the Quran, we end up re-establishing slavery. And this brother is relying on your temperament to be neutral and objective to obfuscate the issues and to hide facts.
Well, the Romans also had some sort of belief that humans are equal, because in the Romans they enslaved people, especially people from other ethnicities and so on, from other regions. But they also had the concept that you could earn your freedom after years of serving as a
because the kind of slavery that existed in antiquity.
But that was even before Christianity.
Yes, but
so what is the concept based on?
Because the idea of slavery in Roman antiquity was different from the idea of chattel slavery. That when we think of slavery, we think of chattel slavery. In the boats. And by the way, Muslims did that to 1 million Europeans. 1 million Europeans. So let's not forget that happened, right? And they didn't give it up by choice like we did. They didn't fight wars against other Muslims to stop it like we did. We forced them to stop their slave trade at gunpoint. That's something to remember. It isn't the case that all religions are equal, and it isn't the case that all values are equal or all beliefs are equal. On this question, it's very clearly the case that you have a right choice and a wrong choice, a good choice and a bad choice.
Based on my own Western raising and based on my own Western beliefs.
Well, I would just ask you, would you like to be a slave?
No, of course not.
Would you like to own a slave?
No.
Right. So it's more than just a Western upbringing. It's based upon a natural law. I guarantee no slave owner wanted to be a slave himself.
But based on the same Christian beliefs.
No, objective natural law. That's what I'm appealing to. Slave owners.
That's my point.
No.
It's subjective. No. We think that if all humans are equal, but if you look at the position of some human beings, like women, they have not been equal. They have not been political rights. They could not be voted. They had even in the Christian tradition of 1,000 years.
So let me.
Other people like homosexuals and so on, they are not seen as equal human beings. So even in Christian.
Actually, we've got to make a distinction between social realities, i.e. those that are of social construct, and the dignity that every human being has. Now, the very idea that a human being is born with dignity is a Christian idea. It's absolutely a Christian idea. It didn't exist.
Identical.
You're born with an equal dignity. Exactly. You're created, not just that you're created by God.
Social status might be different.
But if you're not baptized,
no,
you're not equal.
I'm literally going to tell you what we believe. I'm literally going to tell you. Christians believe that you are created in the image of God, and that imatio Deo is what makes you equal even before baptism. Even before. In other words, the gift that God has given you is that He has created you in image, and that's not dependent on anything else at all.
Even if you're not born in a Christian
Even if you're not born in a Christian family. My Muslim brother is made in the image of God, and that gives him an equality with me in dignity, which incidentally I know is not reciprocated in Islam. In Islam, I am always less of a human being under Sharia law. I am a dhimmi, a second-class citizen. Legally, it's like a religious apartheid. This is the history of the church. We know what happened to us. Because of the Enlightenment, Europeans have forgotten their own history. We have forgotten what has happened in European history. What has happened, all you remember is what the liberals tell you, and the liberals teach you a filtered history that encourages you to be embarrassed and ashamed of who you are.
Okay, but you're referring to
going back to the equality. Social equality comes from political, economic, and social constructs. So not everyone is the same level of wealth. Not everyone has the same level of authority. These are social and political things. But one of the things that made Christianity radical in the Roman age was that slaves and masters come together at the same feast, the same communion table, and they would receive the same sacrament.
In the same church.
In the same fellowship.
But they would not sit at the same bank in the church.
No. You're talking about something from the 1800s. I'm talking about something that goes back. This was why Christianity was so shocking to the Roman world, is that men, slave and free, and women, slave and free, sat as equals at the Agape feast. That's so shocking to the world. It was radical in a way that we can't comprehend because of the success of Christianity. We take that idea for granted.
Which is not.
But it's not something that was inherent. But the reality is, and this is what I mean, is that there really is a choice to be made. Do we want to build our civilization on Christianity or Islam or something else? Because if we build it on Islam, we go to a position where I will always be a second-class citizen. Always. Always. And that has been the experience of Christians.
Kind of limited choices you present to me right now.
Right.
On Christianity or
something else, I said. Or something else. Or something else. But the point is, if we just go through life being neutral about choices, we might find ourselves stumbling into choices into which we disagree. You know, the reality is, I mean, you know, like there's been many examples in history where societies have taken the wrong turn because people saw the right choice but didn't fight for it. And we should fight against any ideology that preaches and teaches that slavery can be normalized. You heard from his own lips, that slavery is not condemned in Islam. You saw an example where slavery
slavery.
Yeah, Malawi, Sudan.
Why don't we impose their severe?
I agree. I think we should. I think the reason why liberals have such hang-ups about what we did in our own slave trade and colonialism that we are now hesitant to impose justice where justice should be imposed.
I think it's the same argument. Like it's not only about equality or slavery; it's also about political value. And Malawi is not important, not economically.
Exactly.
So it's not important.
I totally agree.
It doesn't
impact us. It doesn't impact us, and that's why it's ignored. You know.
Yeah.
So one second.
Yeah, I know. Well, no 1 second. You didn't do 1 second to me.
So
I would love to read a Quran verse to you.
So 1 second.
Possible.
So thank you. So in terms of what you're going to see, right, is an appeal to the 99-1 rule. That's what we Christians call it. 99-1 rule. So he's going to say something to you in the hope you check. What I want you to check is not just what Muslims say about Islam, but what non-Muslims have said about Islam, and look at the evidence, particularly on this question of slavery. beyond the filtered history that the liberals present about Christianity and look at what Christians say about our own beliefs and our own history, right? And make your own judgments. You did hear from his own lips, he said it to your face, Islam does not condemn slavery. You heard it from my lips with a textual proof, Christianity does condemn slavery. And then because of that spiritual freedom, Christians then went on to fight to set peoples free for 2,000 years and still are today, set slaves free.
Well, thank you very much for your enthusiasm.
What's your name, bro?
Marcel.
I just want to give you a gift, Marcel. Do you have a Bible?
At home?
You do? Brilliant. I'd like to give you a different gift then, just before you go.
Sir, I just talked to your wife. We had a very beautiful conversation, and because you asked me the question about manumission and Islam, I would love to read you this verse. Unfortunately, who knows if I'm going to meet you again? Probably not. But if there's something you need to remember when we
the previous one. Right, what happened there, Bob?
So basically, we ended up starting off a conversation about, again, about the fact that Muslims can't show me the criterion by which they choose their scholars. But yet so much of Islam depends upon the opinion of scholars, and it demonstrates that there's no such thing as Sharia law, there's just Sharia opinions, and lots of them, and they all disagree. But then we ended up getting into the kind of appeal to look at Islamic greatness, the greatness of our civilization. Well, if you're going to make that argument, then let's look at all the injustices of Islamic civilization. The fact that for 1400 years, Islam has constituted bodily slavery. And unlike Christian slave trade that was given up by free choice and without force by Christian civilizations, the Islamic slave trade continued until those same Christian civilizations forced the Muslims to stop slavery. And that speaks volumes. We need to remember that 1 million Christians, and that's a conservative estimate, the chances are it's a lot higher, that 1 million Christians were stolen from Europe by the Islamic slave trade. And that injustice was not righted by any internal movement within Islam, but by external force applied by Christians who repented of their own practice of slavery freely and from a position of power. And that difference is because in Philemon, we talk about embracing slaves as brothers, but in the Quran, it talks about using humans as slaves.